Hello! You're listening to Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today, a weekly podcast designed to bring you snippets of encouragement to help you as you go about your day. I'm Jenny Guy, your host. Right now, we're in the season of Lent, which many people around the world observe in preparation for Easter. I'd like to take this time to do a 3-part series titled Getting to Know You, which focuses on each person of the Trinity. Today's episode is the first part of that series and looks at God the Father. Let's get started. If I conducted a survey today on what people think about the Old Testament, I suspect I would learn that many find it daunting, intimidating, or even overwhelming, especially if they're reading it in the language of the King James Version of the Bible. I'm also guessing that the survey would reveal several reasons for their discomfort with it. For example, in many stories, Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament, appears to be stern, forbidding, and harsh. His dealings with humanity seem frightening, bewildering, and inscrutable. Mystery surrounds him, and that mystery can't be measured or explained. The survey would probably also show that the people of the Old Testament seem too strange and their customs too savage and primitive for us to relate to. Finally, the survey's results would possibly mention situations and phenomena that we don't understand how they could happen, like the sun standing still for a day so an army can finish fighting, or fire that falls from the sky and consumes altars, or manna that appears daily for 40 years in a desert. Yes, there is much about the Old Testament and its God that is fantastic and hard to wrap our 21st century minds around. And as a result, much like the ancient Hebrews, we may be inclined to restrict our personal knowledge of God to comfort zones whose boundaries we define. But God wants so much more than that from us. He wants us to know Him deeply, to have a relationship with Him that is as close as any we develop with our loved ones and friends. He wants us to expand our comfort zones with Him. Why do I think this? Because when I strip the Old Testament of its strangeness and realize that it is basically a God-breathed, inspired collection of writings by and about people like us, then I'm able to see God's interactions with humanity from a new perspective. I'm able to understand God's actions as those of a holy Creator who desires to be intimately known by His creation. The people back then loved like we do. They fought wars like we do. They hurt each other and they helped each other, just like we do today. Human nature hasn't changed in the thousands of years separating us from the Old Testament. Neither has God's nature changed in all that time. There are many examples in the Old Testament where God reveals His heart and His desire to be known by us. I'll focus on just 3 of those examples today. I hope that after we consider them together, then you'll be encouraged to accept God's invitation to widen the boundaries of your comfort zone with Him. The first example comes from the book of Exodus. It may be helpful to think of that entire book as one long, extended illustration of the closeness God wants to have with us. When God, through Moses, freed the people of Israel from Egypt, He led them by a column of cloud in the day and a column of fire at night. In addition to providing protection from the desert's searing heat and penetrating cold, the cloud and fire symbolized God's presence among His people. Whenever the Hebrews broke camp and moved forward, the fire and the cloud went ahead of them, leading the way. God also instructed Moses to build a tabernacle, a tent, in which he could be worshipped. He had Moses pitch the tent right in the middle of the camp. Whenever the Hebrews broke camp and moved forward, the tabernacle was dismantled and its components, carried by the priests, went ahead of the people. By living among the Hebrews, God was reinforcing His commitment to be with them 24/7. The second example comes from the book of Psalms. The 10th verse of the 46th Psalm is a very clear and explicit invitation from God to us. It says, "Be still and know that I am God." That word know in the Hebrew is interesting, for it means to know relationally and experientially, to have the close knowledge that comes from physical union. By inviting this closeness, God is saying that He wants us to understand Him and His love for us. He wants us to recognize His ways and comprehend how He operates. He wants us to know His character so that we will trust His willingness to protect and provide for us. He wants us to be familiar with His nature so that we will believe and be confident in the unchanging goodness that is a fundamental part of His being. I think that God Himself shows us how we can have a relationship with Him that will help us get to know His character, nature, and ways. Our third and final example is in the 31st chapter of the book of the prophet Jeremiah. Verses 33 and 34 state, "But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, and write it in their hearts, and will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord." The word know in these verses is the same know that's in Psalm 46:10. Again, God is inviting us to come close and learn His ways, His nature, His character. By saying that He will put His law in our inward parts, God is telling us that He will plant the knowledge of Him deep within us, in our hearts. He is also saying that this knowledge won't be limited to just a few people. It will be available to all, to anyone who wants it. It can take us all our lives to get to know God, but that's okay, for He wants to be with us all our lives. As we deal with life and its problems and challenges, God wants us to know that He is right there with us in the middle of things, just as He was with the Hebrews in the desert. As we wonder what steps to take next or in which direction we should go, He wants us to know that He will be there with us, guiding us, leading us. As we worry about how we will pay our bills or put food on the table or where our next job is coming from, He wants us to know that He has already foreseen our needs and will provide for them, just as He created and sent manna daily to feed the people. God is a God of miracles. He is also a God of the practical and the ordinary. There is no facet of life that is strange to Him or that He can't handle. And He wants to be with us in every part of it. The invitation God extended so many years ago to know Him still stands today. It's up to us to accept it. I hope you heard something today that has encouraged you and possibly given you something new to think about that will motivate or inspire you. If you would like a PDF copy of the show notes for this episode of Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today, visit my website at jguypublisher.com. New episodes are published each week on Wednesday. I hope you'll join me for another installment of Everyday Encouragement, Timeless Truths for Today. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, be encouraged.